It started with a tooth, just a simple dental appointment, but for Bobby Darin, the golden boy of the stage with a crooked smile and a heart too fragile to last, it would be the beginning of the end. He forgot to take his antibiotics. That tiny misstep allowed bacteria to slip into his bloodstream and attack the one thing he couldn't afford to lose, his already damaged heart. Within days, the man who once commanded Vegas stages and charmed presidents was in a hospital bed, fighting an infection he didn't see coming. And maybe, deep down, he always knew it would end like this: fast, sudden, and tragically poetic. Because Bobby Darin had lived his entire life in defiance of a death sentence whispered at birth. A sickly child told he wouldn't survive past 16. He sang harder, loved louder, and burned through life like he was borrowing time. But Bobby's battle didn't begin in a hospital. It began in the Bronx, before he ever knew what a microphone was. Born Walden Robert Casado in 1936, Bobby entered the world in the middle of the Great Depression and under a lie. He believed Polly Casado was his sister. She wasn't. She was his mother. The truth? His actual father was unknown. His mother was a 16-year-old girl, and his grandmother was the one raising him as her own. From the very beginning, Bobby Darin's world was a maze of contradictions. He was told he was special, loved, destined. But he was also told something darker: that he was sick, that his heart had been damaged by a bout of rheumatic fever at age 8, that he wouldn't live past 16. And so, Bobby did what only the greats do with fear. He turned it into fire. He became obsessed with greatness. Piano, drums, guitar. He played them all with manic precision. He studied Dean Martin, Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., not just their music, their moves, their breath control, their swagger. By the time he was a teen, he wasn't just surviving, he was performing. And he did it all with the shadow of death hovering just behind his shoulder. His mother, Polly, saw it. She spoiled him endlessly because she didn't know how long she'd have him. Every cold, every cough sent panic through the house. His family walked on eggshells while Bobby moved like a storm. In school, he was brilliant until he got bored. He'd cut class to write songs, disappear for hours, return with melodies stuck in his teeth. People said he had an old soul. What they didn't know was it was a soul in a hurry, because Bobby wasn't trying to make it to retirement. He was trying to leave a mark before the curtain dropped too soon. With the urgency of a boy racing against his own body, Bobby knew he didn't have time to climb slowly. He had to explode, but every record label slammed the door in his face. Too short, too cocky, too Brooklyn. His early demos went nowhere, and every no only added gasoline to the fire in his chest. And then, fate stepped in, wearing chopsticks. Legend has it, Bobby was sitting in a Chinese restaurant with his manager, brainstorming a stage name that would sound sharper, cleaner, more Hollywood. He glanced up at the fortune sign on the wall. It was a hand-painted Mandarin sign, but the letters had worn off, and what remained looked like Darin. It meant nothing, but it sounded like everything. From that day forward, Walden Robert Casado was gone. Bobby Darin was born, and Bobby Darin sounded like a star. Still, a name wasn't enough. He needed a hit. In 1958, after endless rejection, Bobby barged into the studio and, on a dare, wrote and recorded Splish Splash in a matter of minutes. A novelty tune about a man taking a bath while a party raged outside? Insane. And yet, it worked. Splish Splash exploded onto the charts. Teenagers couldn't get enough. He had charisma, swagger, and a voice that could flip from crooner smooth to rock and roll grit in seconds. Suddenly, Bobby wasn't knocking on the door of showbiz anymore. He was kicking it open. TV shows, tour gigs. Within a year, he was everywhere. His name on marquees, his songs on jukeboxes, his smile on teenage bedroom walls. But Bobby wanted more. He didn't just want to be a teenage idol. He wanted to be Sinatra, Crosby, Ellington, and he wanted it now. So he pivoted. Hard. In 1959, just 1 year after his pop debut, Bobby released Mac the Knife, a jazzy, swaggering rework of a Bertolt Brecht tune about a murderous criminal. Not exactly the teen bop follow-up anyone expected, but Bobby was gambling with time, and he won. Mac the Knife became a cultural monster, #1 for 9 weeks, Grammy Awards, TV specials, Vegas contracts. He wasn't just a pop star now, he was a legitimate artist, a crooner, a showman, a chameleon. But fame couldn't warm the kind of loneliness Bobby carried, because behind the showman, behind the bright lights, he was still that fragile boy in the Bronx, searching for something real. And for a brief, beautiful moment, he thought he'd found it in Connie Francis. They were both young, both hungry, both standing on the edge of greatness. She had the voice of an angel. He had the swagger of a devil in a tuxedo. Together, they were electric. They met in the late 50s during a TV appearance. The banter was instant, the chemistry unmistakable. Connie once said, "When Bobby walked into a room, you felt it. He didn't have to speak. He radiated." They dated in secret, mostly because her strict Italian father despised him. To Mr. Franconero, Bobby was everything a daughter should avoid: poor, Catholic, slick, street tough, too ambitious. But love doesn't care about permission slips. The two kept seeing each other, sneaking phone calls, writing letters, stealing nights together between tour stops. It was innocent, until it wasn't. When her father found out, it got violent. One night, after Connie refused to stop seeing Bobby, her father reportedly pulled a gun on him. Another version said he just used his fists. Either way, the message was clear: you're not welcome here. Heartbroken and humiliated, Bobby walked away, and it shattered him. He'd later say, "She was the only woman I ever truly loved." And years later, Connie would echo the same, admitting that losing Bobby was one of her greatest regrets. They both went on to find fame, money, applause, but never again each other. For Bobby, that breakup was more than heartbreak. It was confirmation that the world always takes what you love most, that being vulnerable only led to pain. So he did what broken people do best. He buried the softness. He turned love into performance. And he poured everything, joy, rage, grief, into the one place he could control it, the stage. But the wound never healed. You could hear it in his ballads, the ones where he lingered too long on a word like baby, or dropped his voice just before the last note. It was always there. A ghost of the girl who almost made the Bronx boy whole. And Bobby, haunted by that loss, turned to the only thing that always clapped back: fame. By the early 60s, Bobby Darin was everywhere. Television loved him. He wasn't just a singer, he was a one-man spectacle. He could host, dance, joke, impersonate Sinatra 1 minute and Elvis the next, and he made sure everyone knew it. He didn't walk onto sets, he stormed them. Talk show hosts either adored him or rolled their eyes. Backstage crews whispered, "He thinks he's bigger than the room." Because maybe he did. Ego? Sure. But Bobby would argue, it wasn't ego, it was urgency. When you're told your heart might give out at 16, patience becomes a luxury. Still, his confidence made enemies. He clashed with producers, rewrote scripts on the fly, demanded rehearsals run on his time. And the audience? They didn't care. They loved him. He was magnetic, until he met someone just as bright, Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy, a black performer who'd shattered barriers, had the Rat Pack at his back and rhythm in his bones. He and Bobby should have been allies. Instead, they became rivals. There was mutual respect, but the competition was electric. Both could do it all. Both refused to be boxed in, and both hated sharing the spotlight. They'd appear on the same shows, each trying to outcharm, outdance, outsmile the other. Off stage, they'd sip drinks and laugh like old friends. On stage, it was war, polite but fierce. One famous story tells of Bobby storming off set after producers asked him to follow Sammy's performance with a lighter number. He snapped, "You want lighter? You go sing it yourself." But beneath the showbiz bravado, Bobby admired Sammy. He knew what Sammy had survived: racism, rejection, glass ceilings Bobby would never even see. And part of him envied Sammy's cool under pressure. They were mirror images, two men of colorless ambition, unstoppable talent, and ticking clocks. One day, Bobby would look back at those TV years not as his golden age, but as his blur. A period where everything moved fast, too fast, where the cameras were always on and the masks were always tighter. And behind that grin, the boy from the Bronx was starting to crack. But just as the cracks threatened to split him open, she appeared. Sandra Dee. To the public, they were perfect. Hollywood's golden couple. He was the fast-talking, street-smart crooner who had conquered Vegas. She was America's sweetheart, blonde, delicate, and forever 17 in the eyes of the audience. They met in 1960 on the set of Come September, and the chemistry was instant. By the time the film wrapped, they were inseparable, and within months, married. To fans, it was a storybook romance. But behind the scenes, it was a collision of two wounded people looking for safety in each other's fire. Sandra had demons of her own. Behind her porcelain smile was a girl who had been exploited by the system since childhood. Studio contracts, diet pills, controlling handlers. Her life had never been her own. Bobby saw that. And for a while, they saved each other. They were magnetic, glamorous, tabloid gold. In 1961, they welcomed their son, Dodd, and for a moment, Bobby thought he'd outrun fate. That maybe, just maybe, the boy from the Bronx had found a real home. But love, when built on wounds, begins to rot from the inside. Bobby was obsessed with control, his career, his health, his image. And Sandra? She was spiraling. Battling anorexia, struggling with trauma, and shrinking under the pressure to remain perfect, she began to retreat inward. And Bobby, in his own storm of ambition and suppressed fear, didn't know how to help. The fights became frequent. The distance grew. Bobby wanted Sandra to step out of the shadows and become his equal on stage, his partner in showbiz. But she had no interest in the spotlight anymore. She was exhausted, broken in ways he couldn't fix. He started staying out late, working longer hours. Rumors of affairs circled, some true, some not. But all of them chipped away at what was once their fairy tale. In 1967, after years of trying to hold together the crumbling fantasy, Sandra filed for divorce. It devastated Bobby, not just because he lost her, but because it confirmed what he feared all along, that no matter how much he loved, no matter how much he built, nothing was truly his to keep. Later in life, Sandra would speak tenderly of Bobby, calling him the love of her life, saying, "I was never the same after him." And Bobby? He never really spoke of her, not directly, but if you listen closely, in the quieter tracks, in the lyrics about loss, about dreams fading into smoke, you can still hear her name, buried between the notes. And what the world didn't hear, was the screaming behind closed doors. By the mid-60s, Bobby and Sandra had mastered the public illusion of perfection, smiling for cameras, posing for magazine spreads, holding hands on red carpets. But the marriage had morphed into a Cold War. There was no common ground, just two people orbiting pain, using silence and sarcasm as their weapons of choice. Sandra, once the picture of youthful innocence, had become emotionally distant. She was battling inner demons, crippling anxiety, trauma from childhood abuse, and a toxic culture that demanded she stay thin, sweet, and submissive. She found solace in isolation. Bobby, meanwhile, turned to control. He micromanaged everything, from her acting roles to her wardrobe. And as his fame soared, so did his paranoia. He became obsessed with image, literally. The once carefree kid from the Bronx now wore elaborate toupees to cover his receding hairline, makeup to hide the exhaustion under his eyes, and tailored suits that masked his ever-thinning frame. He didn't just want to perform greatness, he wanted to look invincible. But behind the scenes, he was unraveling. He accused Sandra of drifting, of being ungrateful, of not supporting his shift into serious music and political engagement. She accused him of infidelity, of gaslighting, of treating her like a prop in the Bobby Darin show. The walls of their Hollywood Hills home became battlegrounds. Arguments could start over nothing and end with Bobby slamming out the door or Sandra locking herself in the bathroom. Their son, Dodd, often witnessed the aftermath: tear-stained faces, shattered glass, the quiet ache of two people who still loved each other but no longer knew how. In one infamous argument, Sandra allegedly threw Bobby's toupee out the window during a fight. Neighbors recalled him storming barefoot through the yard, cursing the wind as he chased it down. The tabloids never picked up the story, but it lived in whispers around the industry. And as their love died, so did the illusion. In 1967, Sandra finally had enough. She packed her things, took Dodd, and filed for divorce. Bobby didn't contest it. Publicly, he played it cool. Privately, he wept. Not because he lost a wife, but because he realized he couldn't fix anything with fame. The man who had beaten death for 30 years couldn't beat loneliness. He bought a new house, a smaller one. He kept it dark. He stopped wearing the toupee around the house. And slowly, Bobby Darin began preparing for the chapter he knew was coming, the one where time finally runs out. But before death took him physically, it came for his soul. In 1968, Bobby Darin found something to believe in again: Robert F. Kennedy, a man of vision, a man of justice, a man who made Bobby feel like he could be more than a lounge act with a ticking heart. Bobby threw himself into the campaign. He wasn't just writing checks, he was marching, speaking, organizing. He traded tuxedos for jeans, Vegas for college campuses. He wanted to be useful, to matter beyond melodies. And then, the gunshots. June 5, 1968, Hotel Ambassador, Los Angeles. RFK was gunned down just after winning the California primary. Bobby wasn't there, but he watched the news replay all night, shaking. He wept in private, didn't speak for days. But it wasn't just the death of a political hero. It was the final straw in Bobby's belief that anything good could last. A week later, still reeling, Bobby went to visit his mother, Nina. He needed her calm, her strength. But instead, he got the truth. She sat him down and told him flatly, "I'm not your mother. Your sister Polly is. I'm your grandmother." Everything he knew, every childhood memory, every bedtime story, every "I love you," was a lie. Polly, the woman he thought was his older sister, had given birth to him at 17, out of wedlock. To protect the family's reputation, Nina raised him as her own. And now, decades later, they dropped the truth like a bomb. Bobby walked out, He didn't scream, didn't cry, he just vanished. For a time, he lived in a trailer in Big Sur. No toupees, no tuxedos, just Bobby, alone, writing, processing, unraveling. He grew a beard. He recorded protest songs. He refused interviews. He was 32 but looked 50. He once told a friend, "If your whole life is a lie, what's left to sing about?" The boy from the Bronx had already survived one heart condition. But the real fracture? It was emotional. He lost RFK. He lost his marriage. He lost his identity. And now, Bobby Darin wasn't even sure he'd ever truly been born. But as broken men often do, he tried to start again. In 1970, with a fragile heart and a crumbling past, Bobby met Andrea Yeager, a young legal secretary in Las Vegas. She was quiet, grounded, the opposite of Sandra Dee. Maybe that's what he needed. They married in 1973. It wasn't a Hollywood wedding, no photographers, no press, just a quiet promise between two people who hoped to rebuild something out of the wreckage. But Bobby, he was never really present. He still bore the ghost of Sandra. He still heard RFK in his dreams. And worst of all, his heart was giving out. Literally. Years of pushing, touring, pills, stress. His congenital heart defect, the one he'd outrun for decades, was back with a vengeance. He checked into Cedars of Lebanon Hospital in Los Angeles. The diagnosis: infection in the heart valves. Emergency surgery was required. It was his second open-heart surgery. The first had nearly killed him. The second, he told friends, "This is it. I feel it." Andrea tried to stay strong, but their marriage was already fading. Less than 4 months after the wedding, they divorced quietly. No drama, just acceptance. Bobby didn't blame her. In the final days, he lived simply. He recorded a few stripped-down albums, just voice, piano, and pain. No flashy orchestras, no bravado, just the raw sound of a man counting hours. He joked to friends, "I've had 2 wives, 2 surgeries, and 2 million regrets." But in truth, he was terrified and tired. He wrote letters to his son. He made peace with Sandra over the phone. He apologized for being distant. She cried. And on December 20th, 1973, under heavy sedation, Bobby Darin whispered something before slipping into unconsciousness. "Did they believe me?" That was the last coherent thing Bobby Darin ever said. The man who spent his whole life performing, singing, smiling, surviving, wanted to know not whether he was loved, but whether he was believed. And then, silence. He slipped into unconsciousness at Cedars-Sinai, never to wake again. But the details of his final moments weren't just tragic. They were bizarre, almost cruel. Doctors discovered Bobby had refused a crucial dose of antibiotics the night before his surgery. Why? Because he had one infected tooth that he insisted needed to be pulled first. He was afraid of the tooth triggering another heart infection post-surgery, but in delaying the antibiotics, his heart collapsed. The irony? It wasn't the concerts. It wasn't the pills. It wasn't even the stress. It was a single tooth that took him down. He was 37 years old, younger than Elvis when he died, younger than Kurt Cobain. But his soul had lived 100 years. On December 20th, 1973, Bobby Darin was declared dead. Sandra Dee collapsed when she heard the news. She didn't do interviews. She just stared out the window for hours. His son Dodd was still a child. He later said, "I lost him before I even got to know him." Hollywood mourned, but not loudly. By then, Bobby had already faded from the spotlight. No scandal, no overdose, no headline shock. Just a man in a hospital bed, holding on to the last note. His funeral was small. No red carpet, no cameras. Just friends, family, and a tape recorder playing his voice. As they lowered the casket, one of Bobby's final tracks echoed, "If I were a carpenter, and you were a lady," and for a brief moment, even the wind held its breath. Decades later, in 2008, a fire ripped through Universal Studios. Among the casualties, thousands of original master tapes, Bobby's included, gone, forever. His raw sessions, his unreleased takes, his voice, trapped on analog reels, now only ash and memory. It was the second death of Bobby Darin, not of the man, but of the sound. And yet, he still sings. Because you can't burn legacy. You can't silence a voice that was never just for fame. Bobby Darin didn't just want to be a star. He wanted to matter, to prove that even with a lie for a childhood, a countdown in his chest, and a fractured soul, you could still make the world listen. And he did. From Dream Lover to Mac the Knife, from protest songs to jazz clubs, from the Bronx to Vegas to the operating table, he never stopped singing. Thank you for staying with us till the end. Thank you for listening to Bobby Darin and for letting us bring his voice back, if only for a little while. We'll see you in the next story.